When it comes to data, we had stronger U.S. retail sales than expected last week, stronger jobless claims numbers than we expected last week as well. So that's really affected the picture in the U.S. markets. Take a look at how futures are coming up, because it's a big week of earnings across the U.S. We're talking about more than 20% of S&P 500 companies reporting this week, including Boeing, including Tesla as well. So far, we have seen some more surprises to the upside, and really that big move that we saw last week also propelled by some positive earnings results. We're talking about the S&P 500 seeing its 47th record high of the year already, Heidi. 6 weeks of gains for U.S. stocks.
Sherry, let's take a look at some of the other key events that we've been watching this week. And global finance chiefs are headed to Washington for the IMF's annual meetings. And ahead of the event, the fund is urging officials to tighten their belts after a warning that global public debt could reach $100 trillion by the end of this year. Over in the Russian city of Kazan, the BRICS group will be meeting starting on Tuesday. They'll likely discuss expanding the bloc further after almost doubling in size this year. Plus, energy professionals and policymakers are attending the Singapore International Energy Week. In focus, the world's leading energy challenges and the actions for transition needed. We're also just 2 weeks away now from the U.S. presidential elections. Democratic nominee Kamala Harris will host a CNN town hall this week, while Republican candidate Donald Trump will hit some friendly terrain, including an appearance before a gun rights audience. Well, some of the price action that we're seeing in some of the world's most risk-sensitive assets signalling concern that the Fed's decision to begin lowering rates may have been premature. Garth Reynolds leads our Markets Live Asia coverage and joins us now. And Garth, that's really the big question, isn't it? Particularly as, you know, data point after data point for the US, particularly pertaining to the consumer, continues to show that resilience.
Yes, it does. And to some extent, that resilience has been fired up by the Fed's decision to not just begin cutting interest rates. I mean, it had made it so clear it was going to cut in September, it would have been hard not to. But to go 50 basis points sent a very strong message that, you know, the Fed sort of has everybody's backs, and consumers to some extent have responded to that. The data indeed has also turned to be more resilient than the Fed might have thought it was. You know, we had some concerns about the jobs side of things, which have waned. They're still there somewhat, which is why the Fed still has an easing bias. But, you know, between the rebound in jobs, signs of very strong retail sales, signs of sticky inflation pressures, you know, you've got this ongoing risk, at least for the bond market, and especially for risk assets outside of the US, that inflation is going to stay high, and the Fed is going to end up not cutting rates in one of the two meetings before the end of this year. And that's why you've got the US dollar riding so high. That's also got a whole range of emerging markets in particular, where central banks and policymakers in general are wondering, well, what do we do now? We thought the Fed was on the easing path, so we can ease as well. That we think we kind of need it. But now we don't know. If the Fed is not going to ease, then we can't either. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there, especially outside of the US. The picture inside of the US is a lot more optimistic.
Yeah, and that, you know, for currencies like the yuan, it's a triple whammy, right? Domestic, US, Fed, elections.
Yes, yeah. The election is one of the things that's hanging over all of those currencies, not just the yuan, but the yuan is very much, you know, at the cutting edge of that trade. But that also drives, you know, the yuan. One of the things that's different now versus last election, and in particular when Trump came to power last time and then pursued those tariffs, is that the yuan has come to play a greater and greater role in, you know, the global FX environment. So these days, when the yuan drops, so does the Australian dollar, so do a range of emerging market currencies. It even feeds through into the euro, which is the most traded pair outside of the US dollar. So that all says that the elections are going to go on being a dollar positive. So the dollar is kind of in a win-win. It gets haven demand because of geopolitical risks, it also gets risk on demand, from on the internal side as the US stock market rises and as yields go up as well.
Yeah, and you're thinking perhaps Trump's policies could be more inflationary, so you're getting more dollar strength. And on the other side of that trade, of course, we have the likes of the Japanese yen, but also the Mexican peso that continues to get hurt, right? As we head towards the U.S. elections, what are some of the key assets that you'll be watching?
Well, those ones that you named are very strongly amongst them. I mean, U.S. yields, that's a big question mark. They've got something of an upward bias from the US political fiscal outlook, in that either side of politics is sort of committed to increasing what's already very strong levels of spending and very large deficits. If Trump is going to win, you're going to add in the tariff component to that, as well as his tax cut plans are perhaps a little bit more extreme in the fiscal expansion side of things than Harris's plan. So that's something to watch. Crypto is also worth watching, even with the Democrats trying to be more crypto friendly. That's instinctively a Trump trade. And then, this Asia in particular, Asian equities, Asian risk assets, they are very much the sort of things that are going to be burdened by a Trump win, and that are going to be relieved should Harris manage to get to the White House.
Garfield Reynolds, who leads the Markets Live Asia coverage there with what to watch in the markets. And of course, Heidi, you mentioned this earlier in the show. We are watching those Asia IPOs. It's going to be a really, really busy week, especially here in Japan, because we have the largest IPO since 2018. We're talking about Tokyo Metro. That's been really popular when it comes to investors. We're talking about a $2.3 billion listing. And all of this as we're headed towards, we're talking about the U.S. elections. Well, we have the Japanese general elections here as well. So a lot of traders, a lot of these companies trying to get ahead of this political noise. And same thing we're watching in India, also another high-stakes trading debut for Hyundai Motor India's $3.3 billion listing.
Yeah, and you talk about, this need to try and get ahead of what potentially could be a really volatile end to the year and start to 2025. This idea of the revival of activity and momentum in these deals markets, and how that's contributing to, what is being seen as a level of animal spirits returning to the Asian market, according to Herbert Smith Freehills. And you said it, we're watching the Hyundai India deal, some of these Hong Kong IPOs as well. Around 20 companies in the APAC region listing shares over the week could raise $8.3 billion in total. In terms of the volume that we're talking about, this is the biggest weekly volume since April 2022. That heavy supply, as you mentioned, we're watching Japan, where you are very closely, India, but also China as well. So it really is sort of a broad revival of some of the deal making and listings that we're seeing for share sales across the region as well. So that would also, as we watch kind of how these debuts are made, really kind of give us an indication of how investors feel in terms of that level of confidence, right, given how much lackluster demand and confidence we've seen over the past few years. Very, very, very busy week ahead for these new share sales. But coming up on the Asia Trade, we'll be discussing the latest developments in the Middle East with Red 6 International. Higa Industries, and the company that brought Wendy's and Domino's Pizza to Japan, will be talking to us about how the week again is impacting the broader food sector. Plus, the World Nuclear Association's Director General will be joining us as Singapore's International Energy Week begins. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg's The Asia Trade is brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Invest globally in stocks, options, futures, bonds, and funds from a single unified platform.
On a $100,000 margin loan, Interactive Brokers charges just 6.33%. Do you know how much your broker charges? Fidelity and Schwab charge over 1.5 times as much. E-Trade is even higher. Move your account to Interactive Brokers and save at least $5,200. or much more if you're trading big bucks.
There is no backwards in recycling, there is no backwards in treating pollutants in the water. The trends at times of what you talk in the press may be different from one crisis to the next. My job is to go beyond crisis, to anticipate. That's why innovation. We knew we could do recycling of plastics. For years, nobody was really interested in that. And suddenly, it takes off. But we found a solution in the meantime. So in a way, my job as a chief exec is to deal with the short term and to be able to deliver essential services even in time of crisis, as well as to see the long term and deliver good result, of course, for my shareholders. Because in a way, delivering good results now is a way to afford the future and to afford to innovate and to see the long term as well.
As we spend some time here on the broader presidential race.
Let's focus in on European politics.
Makes you wonder how politics might play out.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Onen, only on Bloomberg.
Take a look at what we're watching when it comes to oil markets as well as gold markets as well as we continue to monitor the latest developments in the Middle East. We've seen oil posting its largest weekly decline in more than a year as the US revived that push to try and end the conflict in the Middle East. We also saw levels of crude demand out of China slipping as well. So we are seeing not much of a change in that picture there for trading in Brent crude, New York crude, just under that $70 a level there. Gold, though, hitting that record high, haven demand continuing to support prices given what's going on with the US election in 2 weeks and developments in the Middle East. Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held a series of meetings with top security aides to discuss an attack on Iran. It comes after a Hezbollah drone penetrated Israel's air defences on Saturday and exploded next to Netanyahu's private home. Bloomberg's Michael Heath joins us now with the latest. So what are we hearing in terms of this reprisal that we've been watching for a while now, but also this extraordinary breach of Israel's defences?
Yeah, I mean, it just shows that Israel may have wiped out Hezbollah's leadership. It may have punished it in so many ways in terms of its missiles, but it's a serious organisation with serious capability, and this really underlines that. And Israel's had a bit of trouble with these drones. I mean, last week they managed to kill 4 soldiers on a base. Again, sending in 3 drones, 2 were shot down, 1 manages to get through. And just the ability to target the Prime Minister's country house there, it just shows their capabilities. And you sort of suspect that Iran was giving them a bit of assistance there because it's a very sophisticated operation. But even if not, I mean, Hezbollah it remains a significant force. As to the attack on Iran or the expected retaliation on Iran, I mean, you'd anticipate it's coming soon. There was some reports released over the weekend in the New York Times, which sort of showed some Israeli preparations that had been leaked, some Israeli preparations for its attack with quite sophisticated measures, as you'd anticipate, and presumably this Hezbollah making this attempt on Netanyahu's life. Even though he wasn't in the building or anything like that, it's only going to intensify their resolve to strike back.
There's also discussions in Egypt about potentially reviving ceasefire negotiations with Gaza, and there was this idea that, with Sinwar's killing, it would potentially speed up this process. But we know that there's some, serious opposition to concessions within Israel.
Yeah, definitely, Heidi. I mean, it was a very interesting thing that Israel did choose to do this with Egypt. Because you're right, that was the great hope after Sinwar was killed, that maybe Israel can declare victory and move to sort of a political some version of political solution, because if you do that in Gaza, then Hezbollah has already pledged that it would stop firing missiles. So that was sort of the key to unlocking it. But Sinwar's death even has been pushed off the front pages just because the violence has gotten so intense. Not only in Lebanon, Israel has struck the banking arm of Hezbollah, but also back in Gaza, in the north of Gaza, where Israel says that Hamas fighters are reforming. They've been attacking there as well. So it doesn't seem like the violence has tampered down at all. And as we sort of discussed in the past, it's a very right-wing Israeli government, and for Prime Minister Netanyahu to basically have a good hold on office, he needs to keep these extremist settlers groups on side, and they've got no interest in a political solution.
Bloomberg's Michael Heath there with us. Let's bring in for some more analysis Kirsten Fontenrose is a president at Red 6 International. She was previously Senior Director for Gulf Affairs at the US National Security Council. Kirsten, really great to have you with us. And just picking off up Mike's last point, is there a plausibility of a political solution here?
Very likely not in the near term. Originally talks of a ceasefire sounded optimistic. Now, honestly, they just sound tone deaf. Well, the international community clamors for a ceasefire, but the two parties who've opposed one on and off are the only two parties who really matter, and that's Hamas and the Israeli government. The strategy has been to push for a ceasefire and then afterward to talk about who will manage Gaza post-conflict, but it's proven to be the wrong approach. In order to get Israeli buy-in for a ceasefire, the international community has to present Israel with a credible plan for preventing an October 7th attack from ever happening again. And empirical evidence indicates that if Hamas or Hezbollah are left primarily intact or even partially intact, they will regroup and they will attack Israel again in a couple of years. So Israel, since October 8th, has said they will not allow the conditions to be created to enable attacks on them again. So perhaps instead of shuttle diplomacy back and forth between Hamas interlocutors and the Israeli government, the international community should be focused on how Israel will be guaranteed security and focused on how Gaza should be governed after the conflict, because without a credible plan for this, Israel will not agree to a ceasefire.
What does that credible plan look like, right? Because is it realistically possible to have that assurance of Israel's security, given we've seen Gaza essentially decimated, given that we continue to see to and fro between the proxies as well, and we know that, with all of the devastation, that it's likely that we're just seeing more of that cycle and the radicalisation continue?
You're right. And what that credible plan looks like is the burning question. You have Israel and the UAE right now putting forth ideas. You've had ideas from the U.S. government side. You've had ideas from Egypt, from Qatar, but there has not been an agreed upon idea. Part of the problem is Israel says, if we are not the ones inside Gaza guaranteeing our own security, who is going to do it for us? And no one is stepping forward. And even when there's conversation about, well, it could be an Arab force, they only want to do it if there's a U.S. force. No U.S. president right now would be able to commit U.S. troops on the ground in Gaza. It's just unthinkable politically right now for an incumbent president like Biden or for any of the, whether Harris or Trump come in. And frankly, an Arab security force, to be completely honest, would probably not be trusted by the Israelis because, as you mentioned, the radicalization continues. And so ground forces, troop-level forces in many countries, even if they have peace pacts with Israel, would very likely be more empathetic toward Hamas goals than they would be toward Israeli goals. So an Israeli government will not trust that apparatus. So what does that look like? That's the burning question.
How surprised were you by the Hezbollah drone attacks on Netanyahu's home and how deeply they could really penetrate Israel's air defenses, and really what that means for Israel trying to find a way out?
Not entirely surprised, because we know Hezbollah has had a fairly sophisticated drone arsenal as well as a missile and rocket arsenal. Everyone's heard the numbers by now 1,000 times, over 150,000 rockets and missiles, drones inside the caves and tunnels. There was a tunnel last week that was opened that was 22 levels deep, just storing munitions, for instance. So because of Iran's assistance to their drone program, they send them blueprints. They can print quite a bit with 3D printers. A lot of the components can be ordered commercially online. So the wiring is really the only proprietary piece that's very tiny. Those components can be smuggled quite easily. So Hezbollah has built a quite sophisticated drone arsenal of their own. On Israel's side, yes, they have defenses, but as is the case all over the world, drone defense chases the drone offense. And defensive systems take quite a bit of time to develop. The technologies have to know what the enemy is firing at them and then develop a defense toward it. It's very difficult. And you don't know when a drone comes at you, what is the payload it is carrying? How fast is it coming? Is it going to spread a toxin? Is it going to spray something? Is it going to drop a bomb? Is it going to do a one-way attack and dive into my building? You just don't know. So, and each of those takes a different kind of defense. Is it operating on a telecommunications network? Is it operating over GPS? Is it using radio frequency? How is it flying? There's so many unknowns, and the technology changes in the drone world about every 3 months.
Kirsten, how do you see Washington's policy on the Middle East unfolding depending on who becomes the next U.S. president?
I think right now Biden may have about 2 months in November to December to January to take some steps with regard to Israel if he feels like playing it more tough love style, or if he decides to just go all in. And that's because he won't have to worry about elections. He won't have to worry about the Democratic Party playing to both sides of the bipartisan support for Israel that exists in the U.S. electorate. But if no matter who you have coming in, you've heard recently, even the Democratic administration, the Secretary of Defense has reiterated America's ironclad support for Israel. We've had both Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense making those statements. So while there's a lot of recognition, including in a letter October 13th that Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken sent to the Israeli government saying, hey, you are not allowing in humanitarian aid. They did not use the words war crime, and they will not use those words. And I don't think you'll see any American government using those words, regardless of who is elected. Most of the conversations will take place behind the scenes because what neither party wants to do, regardless of their private conversations with Israel, is embolden Hamas or embolden Hezbollah or Iran. They don't want to send the signal that the U.S. will not have Israel's back.
Kirsten, really great to have you with us as always. Kirsten Fontaine-Rose is a president at Red 6 International as we continue to monitor the latest developments in the Middle East. But more ahead is coming up on the Asia Trade. This is Bloomberg.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
The ultimate goal is what everybody talks about. Europe needs stronger banks. Europe needs cross-border. Europe needs banks that are capable to support its industry and the development of Europe so that we are an economic bloc that can hold its own against the US and China.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Let's talk about COVID. What was it like trying to produce a vaccine under such circumstances?
Well, it was unprecedented in every respect. Firstly, we were being watched and questioned every minute of the way. We were in a race to procure raw material that was sanctioned because everyone was clamoring for it. It wasn't just raw material, it was even, equipments and things that we needed to build our facilities. And we couldn't even fly out engineers and equipment at that time, so we were chartering flights to do it because, at the peak in 2020 and 2021, there were many restrictions on being able to fly and visas and all of that sort of thing. Once we got over that, I think it was just the challenge of rolling out as much production as possible, but also balancing which countries get what and trying to satisfy all stakeholders. So we got through that with a lot of difficulty and lessons that we learned. And that is why we need to have, going forward, like a pandemic accords and strategy that the WHO is working on. And I hope that all the countries sign up to it and adhere to it, because otherwise we'll be in exactly the same situation as we were then.
Welcome back. India's central bank governor says he's in no hurry to join the wave of easing by global policymakers. Shaktikanta Das told Bloomberg that while inflation is expected to moderate, significant risks to the outlook still linger.
We expected, say, September inflation to be high. In fact, I had, if I remember correctly, in my statement, monetary policy statement, exactly 9 days ago, on 9th of this month, I had said that in September, we expect a big jump in the consumer inflation number. And we expect also a higher number in October also. But thereafter, in going into November and December, in the third quarter of this, in November, December, we expect inflation to moderate. And with regard to being behind the curve, I would like to say that, well, there can be a difference of opinion between certain sections of opinion makers or certain section of the market. But so far as Reserve Bank and the broad, overwhelming sector of the overwhelming section of the financial markets are concerned, I think expectations and thoughts are quite well aligned. The opinion poll, the polling conducted by various news, the wire services and business channels, all of them had, most of them had said that Reserve Bank will not cut, but Reserve Bank will change the stance, and that was exactly our decision. So I think market expectations and Reserve Bank's policy, they're well conversed. And I would like to say that certainly we are not behind the curve. Indian growth story, as I said in the beginning, the growth story remains intact. India is poised to grow at 7.2% according to the projection which we made in the last Monetary Policy Committee meeting. Growth is holding on, growth is steady, growth is resilient. Inflation is moderating with certain risks about which we have to be very vigilant. So therefore, rate cut at this stage will be very premature and can be very, very risky. When your inflation is 5.5%, and next print is also expected to be high. You can't be cutting in, rate at that stage, more, at that point. More so if your growth is also doing well.
The RBI governor speaking to Bloomberg News Deputy Editor-in-Chief Reto Gregory. This is Bloomberg.
My name is for anyone. Join me at Bloomberg Tech in London on October 22nd.
Jumpstart your trading day on Bloomberg Open Interest.
2 hours of single stock stories that are driving the opening bell action.
We'll take you to Wall Street, Main Street, the C-suite, and beyond.
These are companies that are growing their market.
The great companies in the U.S. are the companies hitting the cutting edge. That's a different story.
Get the inside track on what's buzzing in markets.
With the players who are shaping the narrative.
If you have bad earnings reports, you're going to get punished.
They're not buying what the industry is selling. Join us on Bloomberg Open Interest. Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
The top names in global leadership are on Bloomberg.
There's no doubt housing and housing supply is the most serious economic and social issue in Ireland. But it's also important when you look at housing supply and how to ramp it up. There are also key infrastructural areas around water, energy and other areas that are important enablers to the delivery of housing. We're spending, I think, second only to Italy in terms of EU governments on housing supports and housing supply. We will continue to invest more. It's also how do we make sure we can deliver projects and deliver housing more speedily and at scale. We've set up a new land development agency to assist with that, to assist with utilising public land. We're also reforming our planning laws through our office, through our parliament currently. So investment's absolutely important in relation to housing. There will be more, and I think Apple is an appropriate source of funding for housing, water and energy. But alongside that, government needs to pull other policy levers to more quickly deliver housing too.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg.
Boeing and the union representing 33,000 striking workers have reached a tentative agreement on a new contract. The union will vote to ratify the agreement on Wednesday, just as the struggling playmaker reports earnings. Our global business editor, Peter Vercoe, has been following these developments. So is it a done deal in any sense, or is there sort of a lot of uncertainty still to iron out?
It's not quite a done deal yet. The union workers have to vote on this on October 23 in a couple of days' time. Interestingly, the union leadership hasn't ratified this deal. The first deal that was struck that led to the strike, which was an offer of a 25% pay increase over 4 years, the union leadership had ratified, but the rank and file workers voted that down. That said, this offer from Boeing seems to be getting closer to where the workers were wanting. They were initially after a 40% pay increase, so 35% over 4 years still seems pretty good. There's a $7,000 signing bonus if they agree to it, and guaranteed bonuses of 4% a year, which does again get them closer up to that 40%. One of the sticking points though may be that it still doesn't reinstate a defined benefit pension plan that they lost in 2014, and there's been a lot of anger and a lot of disgruntlement over the past decade about that really led to this strike. So, you know, yeah, it's still up in the air a little bit, but it does seem to be that the two sides are much closer together than they were, even just last week.
All of this coming at a time when Boeing also is facing a series of crises over safety, its manufacturing. So really, what's at stake for the company to get these striking workers back to work?
Yeah, well, it's critical that they get these workers back to work, Sherry. The strike is heading into its 6th week. It's shut down production of Boeing's cash cow 737 MAX, its most important plane. For the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, who started in August, and he's really been tasked with turning Boeing around, which is a massive undertaking given the problems that it's facing, from the workers' strike to the production shutdowns to the safety issues that we saw this year that all started with that blowout on the Alaska Airlines. He's got earnings coming up. He's trying to fend off a loss of Boeing's investment grade rating. We saw last week that they put in place a new $10 billion credit facility. They've filed a shelf registration for a $25 billion capital raising over the next few years. So getting the workers back onto the factory floor, getting production starting again, allows him to move what's probably the biggest headache he's facing at the moment aside, and then start on this mountain of other tasks that he's got in front of him.
Bloomberg's Peter Verko there as we look ahead to Boeing's earnings and, of course, that vote on the ongoing strikes on Wednesday. Now, the latest from the corporate front, Shenzhen-based drone maker DJI has sued the U.S. Department of Defense for adding it to a list of Chinese military companies. DJI says after months of unsuccessfully attempting to engage with the Defense Department, it had no alternative but to turn to the federal court. The world's largest maker of consumer drones was first added to the list in 2022. Apple's newest iPhones are seeing a strong debut in China. According to Counterpoint Research data, sales of the iPhone 16 are up 20% in the first 3 weeks compared with the prior model. Consumers are also continuing to shift to the pricier versions. Sales of the top-end Pro and Pro Max models gaining 44% compared to last year's equivalents. Health insurer Cigna is said to have revived efforts to combine with their smaller rival Humana after merger talks late last year fell apart. Sources say the industry giants held informal discussions recently about a potential deal. The two companies have a combined market value of more than $125 billion. Humana shares jumped in late trade while Cigna slipped.
Sherry, one stock that we're watching, and in fact we've been following this story for quite some time as it's really sort of developed over the past few weeks, but WiseTech, this is the really tech darling that has been a real investor favourite. We're seeing a big decline, in fact falling at one point by as much as 14%, and in fact this is the biggest decline that we've seen in about 14 months for this stock. This, as WiseTech's board is now assessing matters that have been raised in a media report earlier in the week that the billionaire co-founder and the CEO, Richard White, paid millions of dollars to a former partner to settle allegations of inappropriate behaviour. So as the board is reviewing these allegations, which have been reported in some detail in local media for some time, they're saying that they're reviewing a full range of matters raised in the media reports, actively seeking further information and taking external advice. We have seen reporting out of a number of local media newspapers news outlets that a woman made these claims about White in late 2020. The report said that he'd provided a board subcommittee with a stat deck denying those claims. The newspapers themselves are saying they're not suggesting the allegations are true, only that the allegations were made. And he is the largest shareholder in WiseTech. They provide logistics software, market value of about $28 billion US. That big plunge of as much as 14% in that early trade. Quite a contrast given that we've seen this stock actually trading at record highs just over the past couple of months. So we're watching WiseTech, also watching one of the financials, in fact the biggest financial, Commonwealth Bank there. Not a great weekend for CBA. Some of their customers, according to the bank, had duplicate transactions debited from their accounts. They've said that the process to reverse those charges is underway and that customers that find themselves in financial difficulty as a result can request further support. So the customers were left in, quite a quandary there as we saw that technical difficulty. They're saying that some of the other services on the app are still working as they seek to rectify this situation. Also watching South32 as well. In fact, really watching a number of the miners on account of the China story as well as further developments in the Middle East as well. For South32, seeing a little bit of a negative reaction there. First quarter alumina production coming in a little bit softer than expectations and then for the previous quarter as well. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
There is no better place to look into the future than Singapore. A place where fintech flourishes and where this festival brings the unlimited energy of fintech enthusiasts.
For the fourth consecutive year, Interactive Brokers is one of the fastest growing prime brokers and is now number 5 in Preqin's ranking of top prime brokers. Interactive Brokers serves both organizations and individual investors. To get better results, get a better platform. The best informed investors choose Interactive Brokers.
Bloomberg is bringing its flagship event series to Sao Paulo, Brazil for one of the most important gatherings of the year. Bloomberg New Economy has partnered with the B20, joining a vital dialogue between business leaders and heads of state. We come together to generate ideas, inspire action, and drive change. Join me, Eric Schatzker, in Sao Paulo on October 22nd and 23rd. And go to BloombergNewEconomy.com for more information.
Take a look at how we're setting up across Japan. We are waiting for the market opens as we had the Japanese yen surpassing that 150 level at one point last week. We did get a little bit more strengthening right now, holding at that 149.53 level. And this, of course, as we got the top currency chief here in Japan warning of one-sided moves, and traders have been really watching out for potential government intervention. And this, of course, as we continue to await the Japanese market opens as well. The key data point to watch this week out of Japan, the Tokyo CPI numbers. Of course, they will give us an indication of nationwide prices. Our next guest says yen weakness has been driving cost-push inflation here in Japan. Ernest Higa is chairman, president, and CEO of Higa Industries, which brought fast food chains Domino's and Wendy's to Japan and also imports frozen food. He joins me now here in the Tokyo studio. Ernest, great to have you with us. So,
glad to be here.
Talk us through a little bit about the impact that the yen's volatility, because we're talking about 150 right now. We're at 139 just a little bit ago. So how is this really impacting the food scene?
Well, first of all, the volatility, as you mentioned, is very critical. You know, at one time we were setting prices based upon 115 yen, and then it swung to 162. So these very volatile swings that now are like in 150 yen directly impacts the import of foods as well as the whole retail sector, because when it comes to food, 60% of Japan's food is actually imported. Whether you're importing foods or food manufacturer, the raw material is all dependent upon exchange rates. And certainly we'd like to have a strong yen for the imported foods, but certainly stability so that we're able to set our prices accordingly. Because what has happened is as we've had the swings, we've had to increase prices continuously. And the increase in prices never caught up to these swings, and so we need stability.
So you were able to actually push through and sort of, increase the pricing, because what we've heard on the ground here in Japan is that it's been actually hard to really pass on those costs to consumers.
It is very difficult, and so the food industry has actually always been able to increase prices, but has never caught up to the actual cost push inflation. So yes, because the reason there's a resistance to price increases, we're still in a deflationary environment here in Japan.
And by the deflationary environment, you mean the mindset? Because when it comes to actual core prices and headline prices in Japan, we are near the 2% inflation target that the BOJ wants.
So inflation is kind of a very misunderstood concept here in Japan, because it's a little bit like cholesterol. You have good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. You have good inflation and bad inflation. Well, we have
I love that analogy. Yeah. Weak yen, higher prices is actually like bad cholesterol.
Yes, we have bad cholesterol because it's cost push. So that means that costs have gone up and wages have not. And what you really want is good inflation, where actually wages have gone up. And so you actually have real demand pushing consumer pricing. So we've had the cost push, but the idea of the Bank of Japan is go to demand pull inflation. Yeah.
This makes me that I need to research just research on good cholesterol. But how far away do you think Japan is when it comes to hitting finally this virtuous cycle?
Well, I believe that in terms of going from this vicious cycle we've been to a virtuous cycle, I'm actually quite optimistic. And, we have been in deflation, as you know, for over 30 years, and certainly Corona has impacted that as well, and it has been very difficult. But now, as we've come out of the Corona situation, the mindset of the consumer is, let's spend rather than save, whereas for the last 30 years, let's save rather than spend. And I think that is, the mindset there has become very positive, despite the fact that we've had some cost push inflation. But a factor that has not been a big issue until now is this huge inbound traffic that we've had, which is very positive for consumer spending. And certainly consumer spending is 60% of Japan's GDP, so this is a big factor for the economy to get out of deflation.
I wanted to ask about the impact of a couple of, demographic trends. One more short. And as a result of the weekend, but also the longer-term sort of issue of the aging demographic. Has that meaningfully changed the outlook and the trends that you see in your businesses?
Well, everyone's, of course, concerned about the demographics and the aging population. And so there are several levers that are being worked on. First of all, the concept of empowering women to enhance the economy, because right now, for growth, we have to empower women, and they're aiming at 50% of Japan's population. And realizes this is something we have to do. But beyond that, there are more and more changes to visa statuses for immigration, which is increasing. But I think now there are several different factors that will change that. Certainly robotics, automation, and AI. And these things, as you know, in other countries could have a social backlash because they might take jobs, whereas in Japan, because we don't I think that there will be growth in the GDP.
Across the world in your businesses, I believe you also have operated Tyson Foods in the U.S., Australia as well.
We work with them, yes.
You work with them. What are you seeing in terms of the labor impact in those economies, and globally also the demand picture?
Well, so I think First of all, the labor issue in Japan, as well as the world, is becoming a big issue. So that's why people are looking at how automation, robotics. In terms of how they look at labor. So you've had the recent potential strike of the East Coast ports because they said they don't want robotics and automation to replace jobs. Having said that, as I mentioned earlier, in Japan, there's less of a social impact, and so embracing that will certainly enhance the economy. So it's not only dependent upon the population. On the other hand, the reason why we've had a decrease in the population and so as we get out of this deflation environment and go to more of a vibrant economy, which I expect we will, then I also believe this is more long-term, that actually there will be more children in Japan as well, too.
Ernest Higa, good to have you with us, Chairman, President, and CEO of Higai Industries. And catch Japan Ahead, of course, every Monday at 8:40 a.m. If you're watching in Tokyo, that's 7:40 p.m. Sunday in New York, and subscribers can watch live on the terminal using the
The world is full of opportunities, up-and-comers, emerging potential, evolving markets, global players, non-profit that pays off, and new possibilities around every corner.
There are many global investors that aren't interested in China anymore, but there's a lot that are. And obviously the local investors have money in China and are doubling down on investing in China. Many of the Asian investors, and in fact a lot of the Middle East investors, the Americans are gone away. Therefore, there's an amazing opportunity to put capital to work and get returns which are we continue to build out our business in China. It's just where the money's coming from is different. And so we're raising local money in China for investing and bringing those that choose to be there to invest in China. So it's just a different, where the money's coming from is just different.
When it comes to the tech space, let's get more with Annabelle Jewellers. So what's standing out?
Well, there's a number of different names, but I think one of the key ones is going to be in the semiconductor space, because you think about the numbers we had last week, and it was that focus on ASML and that sort of slump we saw off the back because their sales didn't meet the expectations. Its peer, Tokyo Electron, is one of the ones that are watching in the days ahead. Tokyo Electron is a maker of chip equipment or tools that are used in the chip equipment manufacturing process, and it's got a very heavy sales pipeline to China. So that's going to be one of the key ones. Bloomberg Intelligence ones to watch. Of course, we had another report over the weekend as well, talking about the pressure that US lawmakers are putting on Japanese companies and Dutch ones as well, but that pressure to stop or curb their exports to China. And we're hearing that actually shares of Tokyo Electron were cited in that latest letter that lawmakers wrote, in particular to the Japanese ambassador in the US, but saying that perhaps export restrictions aren't really having their intended effect, given you have actually seen shares of Tokyo Electron rising over the course of this year. Yes, SK Hynix is another one that's listed in Seoul, of course, and it's a company that's doing extremely well in the HBM space. High bandwidth memory is a critical part of overall AI infrastructure. So the third quarter numbers are due, and the expectation from our Bloomberg Intelligence team is we're going to see really robust demand for those products. Operating profit could have jumped. You could see better margins coming through, and again, that's that story. They're making more money out of their higher value products like HBM, and that could help offset weakness we have in other areas. Chips that are used in things like PCs and other consumer electronics.
We have Tesla as well.
Tesla is going to be a key one to watch, of course, because we're coming hot off the heels of the robotaxi event, which kind of underwhelmed investors. And so the details we could get out of this earnings call will be pretty closely listened out for. Anything we get in terms of the technical specifications of the robotaxi, whether it's or when it's going to be available, the regulatory climate for it, a little bit on that unveiling of the self-driving car event. Our Bloomberg Intelligence team, that's exactly what they're looking for details of. They're also saying that perhaps margins could have improved given you've got those price
Annabelle Jewelers there with what to watch in a very busy earnings week. Now, Taiwan's premier says the island's government is open to the latest nuclear technology to meet surging power demand from chip makers. Cho Zheng-tai also told us how Taiwan aims to diversify its economy beyond just its lucrative high-tech sector.
Taiwan's economic resiliency comes from the partnership we have with friendly. This is why we believe Taiwan can play a crucial role in the democratic supply chain. We are heavily reliant on to achieve comprehensive growth. We cannot rely solely on high-tech industries. That's why we proposed a dual-axis transformation for small and medium-sized enterprises. We aim to help our traditional industries and small to medium-sized enterprises enter the AI era. We will use government resources to assist them in adopting AI applications and integrating with this industry, allowing Taiwan's economy to grow comprehensively.
So, Mr. Premier, the U.S. is going to have an election, a presidential election. It's just weeks away. From the U.S. and asked Taiwan to pay protection fees. And do you think Taiwan should continue to allow semiconductor manufacturers to, like TSMC, to build factories overseas?
Taiwan also needs to rely on advanced countries for new technologies in materials and equipment. I often say that the government has a responsibility to Taiwan's industries, and Taiwan has a responsibility to the world.
Mr. Trump also said Taiwan should wonder if that's possible in your view.
Taiwan has a very large neighbour with significant ambitions toward it, so Taiwan must take responsibility for safeguarding our sovereignty and national security. In next year's central government budget, we have allocated $2.4 to 2.6% of GDP. While we cannot allocate 10% of GDP to defence in one go, we have increased the budget compared to the past. We also hope that through Taiwan's efforts, the world will recognise Taiwan's determination and provide greater support. What we're maintaining is not only Taiwan's security, but also the peace and stability of the entire Indo-Pacific region.
You mentioned artificial intelligence earlier in this discussion. There is a debate about electricity supply, and I'm just wondering, do you think sort of new nuclear power technology is something, an option, say, for Taiwan that you could consider?
我们知道现在其他各国都在积极的发展。
We know that many other countries are actively developing various forms of nuclear energy. Currently, we expect that Taiwan will have no issues with power supply for industries before 2030. Our nuclear power plants are being decommissioned and operations are stopping. In Taiwan. When we take the next step forward and reconsider the existing nuclear power plants, we will need sufficient manpower. So even though our plants are being decommissioned, the personnel must not be dispersed. They must remain to address new technologies or solve current issues.
Taiwanese Premier Chow Chang-tai speaking with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief emeritus Matt Winkler. And a programming note, we have a new program launching today, Insight with Hasinda Amin at 11 a.m. Hong Kong and Singapore time. Big guests joining the show today. Fatih Birol. We have the market opens in Seoul and Tokyo next. This is Bloomberg.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate.
More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
As the economic picture.
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
In terms of how we should deal with the challenges that are, facing the world and also internally, I think it's just an opportunity also, an angle. And you could see that in actually a bright spot amongst very few in the world today. We want to sound too, large-headed, but actually we will be the flavor of decades. We are determined, we have long-term plans, and we are very clear and committed on our commitment to the investment community at large. I'm not talking about one individual country, but at large in the GCC. Investors to do business in the region, that we are willing to do a lot of structural changes, including actually making it very predictable, very consistent policies.
How some fashion businesses make women feel. And I think there's one thing, being really vocal and being an Instagram activist and talking about something, there's a difference than putting your money where your mouth is. And I've learned and actually do the opposite. And I think that as a young black female entrepreneur, the only thing that I could do was what I know from my experience. And the honest truth is, I didn't set out to create a company that was deeply rooted in the principles of inclusivity and diversity. I set out to make a company that was right for me and my friends. And I knew that if I had a problem, chances are somebody else does. And I think that's where so many businesses are, created, when you're solving a problem that's real for you and therefore real for
This is the Asia Trade. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens. Heidi, it's going to be a busy week of earnings and listings across the world. More than 20% of the S&P 500 companies reporting earnings this week. And of course, the busiest IPO week across Asia since 2022.
From the US presidential election, we're watching for further developments across the Middle East, as well as just the
Japan's general election also happening next week, and right now local polls pointing to the fact that potentially the Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party, could actually lose its majority in the lower house elections. This as we continue to watch the Japanese yen very close to that 150 level that it crossed last week against the US dollar. We're seeing a little bit more strength in today's session, but really not by much. And we had seen a little bit of gains after we heard more comments coming from Japanese authorities, with the chief currency official talking about one-sided moves in the markets that he's watching very closely. So traders speculating that potentially authorities watching in the Japanese market. Tokyo Metro's $2 billion listing on Wednesday. Take a look at how South Korea is coming online, because we have seen weakness in the Korean won as well, a 2-month low against the US dollar. This as we're getting now the trade numbers, early trade, the first 20 days of October. We're seeing a deficit of more than $1 billion. Exports falling 2.9% year on year. Imports also falling 10.1% year on year for the first 20 days of October. But the caveat, of course, we had more holidays in the beginning of the month. We're talking about 3 national holidays, including National Foundation Kospi coming online with 0.3% gain, while the Korean won is holding steady. Heidi.
Take a look at what we're watching when it comes to trading in Australia, with just an hour of trading under our